getting to know him, what was that like?
You know, there are a lot of people that he ticked off. You know, a lot of people he, ate up for the sake of a column. And there are people he would never speak to for forevermore. And there are people who found him difficult, to put it mildly. That was not my experience with him. I think that he had heard that I was going through cancer, and I was writing the About New York column for the New York Times. So I was writing a column as well in New York. And he heard through the grapevine that I was going through cancer. He knew about cancer from the deaths of his first wife and then his older daughter. And he called me up, and there's a whole story about him walking me to Sloan Kettering. And I'd never met him before. You know, I'd always known him. He'd always been a part of my life in a sense, but I had never met him. He calls me up, says, "I'll go over there with you." And he walks me to Sloan Kettering, just distracting me with stories about old boxers and wise guys and what have you as we're walking across Central Park. And then we go into the hospital, and well, we're at the hospital, and I say, "Thank you, Mr. Breslin." He goes, "I'll go in with you."
Right.
Go into the hospital with me? So we go upstairs. My wife is there with me, Mary, and I check in. He's chattering away, distracting Mary, distracting me, distracting the nurses, quite frankly. And I go into this room, and I get into one of those really horrible Johnnies that you have to button on the back, and paper slippers. And then they lead me into this little room that's about the size of a closet to wait for my procedure. And I go into the little room, and there's my wife, and there's Jimmy Breslin, like Jimmy Breslin, right? And he's chattering away. He's like making Mary laugh. He's making me laugh. I'm scared as hell because the procedure I'm about to undergo is unpleasant, and it wound up not being good, right? And so it goes on and on and on. I keep saying, "Thank you, Mr. Breslin. Thank you, Jimmy." No, I'll stick around. And then the gurney comes, and I get on the gurney, and the joke is that I made room for him. So that's the only, as I'm being wheeled away, I'm seeing, yes, my wife, I'm looking up to God, but I'm also seeing the mug of Jimmy Breslin. And then the next day, it wasn't a good outcome. Well, I'm still here, but at that time, it wasn't a good outcome. I felt sorry for myself. I'm pretty good at that. And I was walking the streets of New York. I was supposed to write a column, but I told my editors, "I think I need the day off. I need to chill." He called me up and said, "What do you got for tomorrow?" And I said, "I thought I'd take it off. I need a break." He was, "Screw that. Screw that." He said, "Find something. Write something. It's all over the city. Look on the pavement. Write. Goodbye." And so what he was doing is really basically calling me out, right? Like, this is a privilege, what we do. God damn it, do it, right? Use whatever has happened to you, have it inform the language, and write. And I did. I went back. He called, Jimmy Breslin calls you out for not writing. You better write. And so I went back to the office, and I wrote a column about walking across Central Park and how we're all in our own little movies, and we don't really notice one another. And I was in my own movie. I didn't even mention Breslin. And so after that, he would call me up and check in with me and, sometimes flatter me or just to gossip or whatever. And I was a finalist for the Pulitzer one time, which means I didn't win the Pulitzer. And he heard that I was upset about it. I don't know if I was upset. I was like, again, feeling sorry for myself. And he left a message on my phone that I wish I still had, like, this doesn't matter. This isn't why we do it. Don't worry about that nonsense. And so we had that kind of relationship all through life. It was always supportive. It was never antagonistic. And I just found him, as opposed to the personality that everyone knew of Jimmy Breslin, drinking beer and getting into fights, he had a huge, huge heart. He was very, very empathetic. And he had to have been to have written what he did.